Salute BookTube, welcome to my channel, thank you for being here. This video we're going to be continuing my epic autumnal book haul, which has gone on too long. I got too many books to be honest, but it's too late now for regret, so we're just going to plow through. Just before we do get started, just a few prefaces. Number one, I'm not doing this again for cloud chasing or to show off a mega book haul. You know, there are channels where there's book hauls of 100 books, 200 books, or whatever. That's not why I'm doing it. As I've mentioned in the previous parts of this book haul, you can watch on my channel. Where I live, and for those who don't know, I'm in the heart of the Middle East, in the United Arab Emirates. Where I live, there's about 3 or 4 bookshops in the whole country. And for that reason, if I don't patronize these bookshops, or the reason I go and buy more books than I really need is to support and to patronize these bookshops, to keep them afloat. Because they're independent used bookstores that sell books in English. Of course, there are new bookstores, but the books are expensive. There's always Amazon, but Jeff Bezos doesn't need more money. So that's why I do it, to support them. So that's the first reason why I do it. Just related to that, there are libraries here. I've mentioned this before, but the libraries are majority Arabic books. So English books aren't going to be a priority. Newer English books or obscure English books. You know, if there's something about, I don't know, some novel about growing up in the Baltic countries, is going to be rare to find in the library here. They're more regional in their outlook. Again, that's the reason why I also purchase a lot of books. If I find a book at the bookshop, it's probably the only copy of that book in the entire country, or probably in the entire region. So you got to grab them when you see them. At least that's my excuse for doing this and for overindulging in books. So that's number one. Number two, what I just wanted to say before we actually start with the books. This one is also, I've themed it. So again, regulars, part one, if it had a title, would have been BookTube recommendations. Those were books inspired by BookTube commenters, BookTube friends, other booktubers just talking about books stuck in my head. And then when you're at the bookshop, you're, oh, that booktuber mentioned this, or I remember the comment saying that this was really good, so you just grab it, or you take it, or you put it in your cart. So that was part one. Part two was much more history. It was specifically, it was divided between Arabian or Middle Eastern history and American history. That was part two. And then part three, which I had recently or last uploaded, was, if you could give it a title, was classics. I thought I would mercifully give you a break from the nonfiction and the heavy history. So part three was classics, and a lot of classical fiction, some 19th century authors, and some older classics, ancient classics, that kind of stuff. That was part three. So that's, yeah, 1, 2, 3. Part four, even I'm losing count. This is a book haul is so large. This is part four. Oh, sorry, for part four, I'm going to have to disappoint everybody and go back to history. This is, again, we're back to history. Again, for those of you who are new to this channel, most of what I read is nonfiction, mostly history, but other nonfiction as well. I'll dabble in fiction, definitely. I read fiction here and there, definitely, just not as much as perhaps I should. So this is back to history, but this is history divided. If the last history was, the video, I think part two was Arabian or Middle Eastern history and American history. This one I've divided into European history and also East Asian history. So anything east of the Middle East. So there's some stuff about India and then about the Far East. I'm not sure about China, but maybe Southeast Asia. We'll get to that. And then there's Europe. It's just a mishmash of European stuff. So we'll start with it. I think we'll do a bit of European, and we'll switch to the Asian, and then we'll go back to and end with the European. That's how I've organized this. So, okay, with that 5-minute clear throat clearing, we can start. Actually, the first book I'm gonna show here isn't nonfiction. It's fiction, but it's heavy historical fiction. And this one on BookTube hasn't, from what I've heard from BookTubers, hasn't got a very great reputation. I've heard stuff like boring, but I grabbed it anyway. This is by Colleen McCullough, and it's Caesar. So again, it's a work of historical fiction following this guy's life, Caesar. I actually read an actual biography of Caesar earlier this year, just before I started this BookTube channel. So hopefully this will still be fresh. I'm not the biggest Roman history guy. Again, Roman and Greek history is very Western civilization. I'm not a Westerner. I like I like it when Rome and Greece enters into the Middle East. That's when I find it interesting. But campaigns in Gaul and France or Germany, not really very appealing to me. Also, Colleen McCullough, I think, made her name. She made her name with a romance novel, and it did really really well. It set her up for life, and then she could indulge and write whatever she wanted to. And she wrote this as a part of a series. I think it's called the Master of Rome series. You can see the other volumes in the series here on the front on the whatever you call this page. It's the name escapes me. The First Man in Rome, The Grass Crown, Fortune's Favorite, Caesar's Woman, then this one Caesar, then The October Horse. So I don't know. This could be like part 5 of a 6-part series. So I don't know. Shall I try to find the other parts of the series or just delve into this? That's a good question. Can I just get into this, or do I have to read the previous volumes, the earlier volumes in the series to get this? That's another question to ask. But anyway, it's there. It was cheap. I'm supporting the book club, the bookshop. So that's the reasoning behind it, despite the negative reviews that the series got, because apparently it just I don't know. I have to read this and then let you know if it's good or not. The next 2 books are sort of related. This is British history. This is actually, I have this book, but the copy I have isn't that great, so I found a better copy in better condition. This is by Lawrence James, and it's called The Rise and Fall of the British Empire. Again, I'm trying to make this exciting. Look how big that is. I'm trying to make this exciting. I hope I'm succeeding, but trust me, it can be exciting if well written. Rise of the British Empire is interesting, but doesn't really excite me as much as Fall of the British Empire. The Fall of the British Empire, again, I should be doing more writing than I do, but the biggest writing project I've ever done, what I've gotten the furthest, is a book related to the end of the British Empire, which is an era, late 19th century, early 20th century to mid 20th century, up to World War II. It's just an era that I enjoy. And so that's the reasoning behind getting this book. Just I think, looking back, I think the 1930s, or just the decline of the British Empire, it's not just the decline of the British Empire. One could argue it was sort of like a decline of Europe. Yes, after World War II, there was a bit of a revival, but I don't know. It's too early to say what the future of Europe and Britain is. But I don't know where a rise and fall, where would it start? I guess the fall would be World War II. I just want to quickly see part 1. Yeah, it's 1600. So just at the end of the Elizabethan era, as the Britons started discovering colonies or discovering new lands, and then setting sun is 1945 to 1998. Okay. Yeah, that's actually the part I'm most interested in, post World War II, and then a little bit before World War II. So let's say 1930s to the 1960s, 50s, 60s. I think Suez and what happened in Egypt. Anyway, I won't bore you guys. We'll keep on, we'll keep going in the interest of time. The other book is related. This is by Jeremy Paxman, and it's called Empire. Uh, Again, same, I think, subject matter, but much smaller. Again, Jerry Paxman also a prolific author. He's got a book called The English, another one called On Royalty, and another one called The Political Animal and Anatomy. I've seen this author around. There he is. It's actually a nice cover. Almost new. I bought this at a used bookstore, but untouched. It's almost, even the plastic is like fresh off the press. It hasn't even been opened. I think I'm the first person to ever open this book, but just quickly look at see, when you talk about British Empire, this is really global. That's a global history. That's not Britain. British history. It's a global. The title of this map is The British Empire Throughout the World, 1905. So, yes, it says British. It doesn't say British, it says Empire. So, again, just trying to find the table of contents to see. Having difficulty finding the list of illustrations. This is strange. Okay, there's no table of contents because I think it's just chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They don't. Okay, yeah, it's just numbered. But there's stuff about East Africa, British Empire history, rise and fall, I would imagine, but smaller. And then going back to the subject of the West and Europe, broader than the British Empire, this is a book by controversial, more right-wing, sort of MAGA author Douglas Murray, The War on the West. The subtitle is How to Prevail in the Age of Unreason. Douglas Murray is quite big on social media, on YouTube, etc. Again, more MAGA, more British, sort of, who's the Nigel Farage type of right wing, maybe more the Tommy Robinson. I have his other book, I think it's called The Strange Death of Europe. So he writes mostly about, well, his first book was about Europe, talks about Britain and Europe, but I think he's moved to the US and he's become more like, what's threatening Europe is going to affect America, so beware. But what makes Douglas Murray a bit unique from let's say, other right-wing authors is I think he's a out-of-the-closet gay man. And I think that's the first thing that drew him to the right. Most, you would assume, left-wing Europeans would be more of a left-wing. Most gay people in Europe or the West, you would imagine, would be of a left-wing persuasion. And I think Douglas Murray was, until he discovered, there was a lot of, he wrote a lot about the rise of more fundamental Islamicism in Europe. So about just the Islamicization of Europe. That's how he made his name. So there's a lot of that. But again, because he's a gay man, I think he was never part of the old right or the neocon sort of evangelical right, because especially the evangelical right, probably wouldn't have accepted a gay man or would be suspicious of that, at least, let's say, 20 years ago. But what Douglas Murray found, he found his niche when MAGA came, because Donald Trump is right-wing, but he's not religious right-wing. It's a different kind of right-wing. And I think Douglas Murray, let's say if you're gay and right-wing, or I don't know, there's a place for you in that milieu, rather than in the hard or the old evangelical sort of neocon world. I don't know if that made sense, but anyway, I have the book, so now I have two of his books, maybe three, so I can maybe do a reading project out of Douglas Murray. But don't agree with the author much, but still, he's making a splash on social media, so you need to pay attention, whether you like him or not. The next book, now we're going to go a bit to Eastern Europe. Specifically, the next two books are what's happening in Eastern Europe, in Europe generally, the whole Ukrainian Russia imbroglio. I don't know what to call it. This first book I have is called In the Midst of Civilized Europe. Uh, the subtitle is The Pogroms of 1918 to 1921 and the Onset of the Holocaust. And the author is Jeffrey Weidlinger. Weidlinger. Jeffrey Weidlinger, In the Midst of Civilized Europe. The Pogroms of 1918, 1921 and the Onset of the Holocaust. Is this in English? His name is a bit foreign. It's not translated. No, it's not translated. It's originally in English, but there's blurbs. Timothy Snyder is blurbed here, but if just because the title doesn't really give away much, so I'll just read a little bit to get a better understanding. It says from award-winning historian, the first full depiction of the wave of anti-Jewish pogroms that followed the Russian Revolution and how they laid the groundwork for the Holocaust. Between 1918 and 1921, more than 100,000 Jews were murdered in Ukraine by peasants, townsmen, and soldiers who blamed the Jews for the turmoil of World War I and the Russian Revolution. In hundreds of separate incidents, ordinary people robbed their Jewish neighbors with impunity, burned down their houses, ripped apart their Torah scrolls, sexually assaulted them, and killed them. Largely forgotten today, these pogroms, ethnic riots, dominated headlines in international affairs in their time. Aid workers warned that 6 million Jews were in danger of a complete extermination. 20 years later, which is the 30s, these dire predictions came true, and that's when Adolf Hitler and Germany. So pogroms in what I think they call it the Pale of Settlement, mostly Ukraine, the Ukraine, and then as it mentioned here, 20 years in World War II, it would actually become a Holocaust. This was a pogrom, and then 20 years later, it was a Holocaust. And I think, let's see, just in the end papers, this is what these are called, the end papers. It's a map of Ukraine. I don't know if it shows well because it's black and white, but you've got Kiev. It's basically Ukraine. So this is mostly happening in Ukraine. And then there's the author, Jeffrey Weidlinger. But what was I saying before? Yeah, so these pogroms in 1918 and 1921 actually caused the Jewish people that had lived in Eastern Europe in places like Ukraine and I guess Poland, mostly Ukraine and Belarus, to actually immigrate west, to immigrate or migrate to Austria and to migrate to Germany. And it was their growing numbers which had incited Hitler to hatred. Because he had moved to Vienna and he just saw the number of Jews coming from the east just increasing, and they were escaping these pogroms. So this had a big effect on the Holocaust that happened under the Nazis. And the number of Jews had just, in Western Europe, just increased in the 20s and 30s. So at least that's what I understand, but I know very little of this, very, very little. So again, it's focusing on Ukraine and I guess parts of Belarus, but mostly Ukraine. And then it says the wave of anti-Jewish pogroms that followed the Russian Revolution. But then it says hundreds of thousands of Jews were murdered in Ukraine by peasants, townsmen, and soldiers. Ukrainian peasants, townsmen, and soldiers, or Russian? Who's to blame for this? That's what I want to know. That's the first thing I want to know about this. Was it actual the Ukrainian people, or were it Ukrainian groups that were responsible for these pogroms, or was it influenced by Russian, Soviet, communists? From what I understand, it's more of a Ukrainian phenomenon. But again, I need to read it to find out. I don't want to jump to conclusions. But again, Ukraine very much in the news. It raises the question. I mean, how much do we know about Ukraine? Does Ukraine... I know the West is supporting Ukraine against Russia with the understanding that Ukraine can become much more independent of Russia and perhaps join the European Union, perhaps join NATO. But how much do we know about Ukraine and Ukrainian history? Has Ukraine ever had a democratic experience? Do they have any history of democratic governance ever in their history? I don't know. I don't. There's no period that comes into mind where I think of that to be true. And then there's this sort of kind of, what was it? What did they call it? Yeah, wave of anti-Jewish pogroms. Again, as much as Ukraine is in the news, I should know more. I hope this book will help me understand more. And then one more book before we go back, or we go to more Asian history. This book is also Eastern Europe. If the first book about Eastern Europe was about Ukraine, this is by Russia, or this is about Russia, and it's by Orlando Feigs, or Orlando Feigs. It's called A People's Tragedy: The Russian Revolution, 1918 to 1924. Or sorry, 1891. Sorry, I'm reading it backwards. 1891 to 1924. And look at this; it's huge. I'm having trouble carrying big book about late 19th century, early 20th century Russian history. Very dramatic time. For those of you who remember part one, a book called part one, I hauled this, which is a short history of Russia. Look how small that is. And look at this. There's a big history of Russia. Look at the difference. This is like, you can fit like 5 or like 7 of these into this brick. Again, I think 1891 is when Tsar Nicholas II assumes power, and then 1924 is when Lenin, I think, becomes or I think that's when Lenin passes away in 1924. Again, don't quote me, but that runs the whole gamut. 1905, the Russian-Japanese War, I'm sure will be here. Again, Orlando Feigs or Feigs, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. I've got another of his book. It's more of a cultural history. It's a cultural history of Russia. It's called Natasha's Dance. I've got it very close by. So this one's more cultural. This one is definitely more like history, like proper history. So in my comments, I've been getting. I had mentioned in the last video about classics, that I need to get into Russian literature. I also need to get into Russian history. I need to do like a year of just a project of Russian history and Russian literature. Just perhaps learn the Russian language, perhaps move to Russia, who knows. But this will definitely play a part in addition to the literature. I have some commenters there's some booktubers who are quite intense Russian readers, so I've got good mentors. It's just a question of when to start. But again, I mean, people will say, well, why would you want to read this chunker of a book about Russian history? You're not Russian, you're not. Again, just like British Empire, I think Russia, because it's so large, you can't call it just Russian history. It's really a global history, whether it's Europe, whether it's Japan or Korea, whether it's Central Asia, whether it's the Middle East. Russia is again, like British imperial history, it's a global empire, global history. And then this, I'm hoping a history book about Russian history of this size, I hope is really good. There used to be a thing on BookTube where I think they took it from a French book prize. There was a French book competition where basically what they did was they opened the book to page 112, just a random page, usually page 112, and just start reading. And whichever book has the best page 112 would win the award. So that's what I'm gonna do with this book, just to give it to see how does Orlando Fige or Fiji's, how does he write, and how good is this history? So I'm open to page 112, and let's read and give it a shot. It says, Like most of Russia's industrial cities, St. Petersburg had developed without any proper planning. Factories had been built in the central residential districts and allowed to discharge their industrial waste into rivers and canals. The domestic water supply was a breeding ground for typhus and chloria, as the Tsar's own daughter, the Grand Duchess Tatiana Nikolaevna, discovered to her cost when she contracted it during the centenary celebrations in the capital. Well, actually, just about the waste in river and channels and the domestic water supply was a breeding ground for disease. I don't know when this is dated. I don't know where we are. This must be again late 19th century. I'm reading a lot of Victorian history now. Victorian London was similar. It was stinky, it was dirty, it was disease ridden. But I think, well, let's read on. The death rate in the city of Tsars, that's St. Petersburg, was the highest of any European capital, including Constantinople, with a chloria epidemic on average once in every 3 years. In the workers' districts, fewer than 1 in 3 apartments had a toilet or running water. Excrement piled high in the backyards until wooden carts came to collect it at night. Ew. uh, Water was fetched in buckets from street pumps and wells and had to be boiled before it was safe to drink. Throughout the city, on house fronts, inside tram cars, and in hundreds of public places, there were placards in bold red letters warning people not to drink the water, though thirsty workers, and especially those who had recently arrived from the countryside, paid very little attention to them. Okay, see, I think, again, yeah. Nothing of real consequence was done to improve the city's water and sewage systems, which remained a national scandal even after 30,000 residents had been struck down by chloria in 1908, 1909. Okay, early 20th century. There was a good deal of talk about building a pipeline to Lake Lagoda, but the project remained on the drawing board until 1917, basically until the communists came into power and the Tsar's government was crumbling. I think that's the difference. I compared it to St. Petersburg to London. Here, Fiji compares it to Constantinople at the same time, which is really Istanbul. I don't know why he's using Constantinople, but we'll let that slide. Um, uh, at least in London, something was done about it. There were reforms in Victorian Britain which sort of alleviated the issue of stinky sewage and excrement piling up and garbage collection in the 19th century. It seems in Russia, under the Tsar Nicholas II, a bit slower in responding, and therefore, well, too slow in responding because eventually he lost his throne. But I guess that's the difference between Russia and Britain, for example, in the same period. But yeah, I mean, I just read, that was nonfiction. I'd read about half a page. I find that interesting. I don't know. You guys, you can be the judge. Uh, it can be interesting if well written. That was well written. If the rest of the book is like that, then that'll be fun to read. At least for me. At least for me. So now we're done. Well, let's take a break from Europe. I'm going to switch to Asia. Um, I'm going to try to do this quickly because I don't want this video to keep going on and on. So we'll do a bit of Asia and then we'll go back to Europe. I've got a few more about Europe and then I'll end this. I promise. Um, the first one is one of these books again written by let me show it to you and then I'll explain why I got it. It's by Stephen Chan and it's called The End of Certainty. And the subtitle is Towards a New Internationalism. So this is a book. It's a book I'm seeing a lot of, especially from Indian and Chinese authors. I don't think he's Chinese. He might be American of Chinese or Asian origin. Stephen Chan is professor of international relations and was the foundation dean of law and social sciences in the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London. His previous books include The Zen of International Relations, Robert Mugabe, A Life of Power and Violence, and Out of Evil and Grasping Africa. So he's an African specialist. His name is Stephen Chan, which sounds East Asian, but he could be. Stephen Chan is professor of international relations. He began life as the son of Chinese refugees in New Zealand. Okay. Studied classics, came to the UK, and spent several years in Africa as an international civil servant. He has held visiting positions in many universities and has lectured on 5 continents. In his academic writings, he attempts to find the fusion he believes has been important in his life. Okay, his previous books, we've already listed them. These are Asian or people, scholars of Asian origin, a lot of British Indian, but also Indian and Chinese and Western Chinese, or Chinese Westerners of Chinese origin, who writing books about the rise of the rest. Let's say, I don't want to say decline of the West, but at least the rise of the rest. So an emerging China, an emerging Africa, an emerging India. Writing with a lot of confidence that this is it's a done deal. It's a done thing. Um, so again, but he has a unique background, and he's also has a specialty in Africa. So it's going to be interesting to see. Just quickly, it says here, Chan argues that international politics has failed because the certainties of traditional philosophy do not help us understand power shifts and struggles in an endlessly diverse world. Only by fusing different strands of Western, Eastern, religious, and philosophical thought will we properly be able to move forward amidst uncertainty. In doing so, Chan takes us on a remarkable journey from the battlefields of Eritrea to the Twin Towers via the Book of Job, Clausewitz, Fanon, and Wahhabism. You will never think about politics in quite the same way again. Okay? Um, yeah, again, this whole East-West sort of dichotomy, and copyright 2009, 2010. Again, I've got a few books on this sort of similar author background, similar kind of subject. And again, for us in the Middle East, it's interesting because we're in, as the name says, we're in the middle. There's the West and Europe and North America, and then there's the East, India in the East and the Far East, and we're in the middle. So we always in our history, and even now to an extent, at least where I am in the Gulf region, we're like middlemen and middlewomen. We sort of link the East and the West, so it's always good to get both sort of viewpoints, I guess. Anyway, the next book is also about East. Well, that one is more global. This one is about East Asia, definitely. It's about a specific country called Cambodia. It's by Philip Short, and it's called Pol Pot, or it's a biography of Pol Pot. The subtitle is The History of a Nightmare. Again, big book. Not going to be comfortable reading. I know very little about Cambodia. I know very little about Pol Pot. I know very little about the 1970s, the Vietnam War. It's just before my time. Again, I'm a Middle Eastern person. Maybe Americans will know more about Vietnam and what happened there. Maybe at least they should. Of course, people from Vietnam or Cambodia or East Asia will probably know more about it. I don't, so I'm looking forward to reading. Well, I don't want to say I'm looking forward to this, but it's gonna be. I'm gonna learn a lot from this because I've heard it's a nightmarish regime, a lot of death and destruction. Now we're gonna turn. The last 3 books about Asia are mostly to deal with the subcontinent. That means India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, that sort of thing. This one is by Arthur Herman. It's called Gandhi and Churchill. That's Gandhi, that's Churchill. The epic rivalry, the subtitle, the epic rivalry that destroyed an empire and forged our age. So this is actually linked. I could have linked it to the decline and fall of British Empire. This is definitely there. Arthur Herman is a well-known author. I think I have another of his book called How the Scots Invented the Modern World. I don't have that one, but I've seen it in bookstores. To Rule the Waves, How the British Navy Shaped the Modern World. I think I have a copy of that, or I had. Maybe I got rid of it. But so this author is known. But again, he deals with Britain in India, the end of Britain in India, Churchill and Gandhi. I think a well-written, a well-covered subject, but again, I saw it, so I grabbed it. Hopefully it's well-written. because I think rule to rule the waves, the previous book, I don't know, I didn't enjoy it too much. I didn't like it, but I've read it a while ago, so maybe I was just young and dumb. Anyway, next book, Dalrymple. William Dalrymple, I always mix it up. Very well known author on India, specifically, mostly travel writing, but he's also done a lot of history. This looks like a novel, but I think it is a history. It's about Afghanistan, the battle for Afghanistan. It's Return of a King. Again, I don't know too much about the background. I could read just very briefly the spring of 1839. The British invaded Afghanistan for the first time. That's just the first sentence. I'll leave it at that. 19th century, the beginning of the Victorian era, Britain in the Indian subcontinent, but a big chunker of a book. And then sticking to India, this is a book about a lady who led the country and who I really got to know when I went to India because there's a big shrine and museum about her. She's really the golden child of the early Indian Republic. This is called Indira. The subtitle is The Life of Indira Nehru Gandhi, and the author is Catherine Frank. Uh, um, Thoughtful cover, thoughtful lady. Again, her name, that's very important. Nehru Gandhi. Indira Nehru Gandhi. Her father was Nehru, Jawaharlal Nehru. Um, no, was it her father? Oh no, I'm messing up now. Gandhi, yes, Nehru, uh, the second prime minister of India after Gandhi, or who took over, or he was the first prime minister of India. I don't think Gandhi. I'm messing up my Indian. I'm sorry, but Gandhi was the drove the British out. Nehru became the first prime minister. Nehru married Gandhi's daughter, and they had a child. It was her, and she became prime minister of India. She was prime minister of India in the 70s and 80s, 70s and 80s, if I'm not mistaken. And then she was killed by I think her security guards because of issue related to Sikh nationalism. Uh, so fascinating character of a fascinating country. I went to India, although I did very touristy things. I caught the India bug, and I really want to go again. I have no excuse because it's really close. The only excuse I have is I don't have money, but it's really and I don't have time. But it's really close. I can get on a flight and I can be there in about 2.5, 3 hours. And it's such a large country. I've seen most of not most. I've seen a bit of the north, Delhi, the capital. I'd like to see more of the south and just learn more about India in general. My India library is growing. It shouldn't, but it is. Um, it is what it is. Okay, and then just if we go back to Europe, I'll wrap this up. I don't want this to keep going. Maybe about 4 books left. This one is called In Europe's Shadow. It's by Robert D. Kaplan. Again, neocon. Is it fair to call him a neocon? Yes, maybe. Yeah, he was pro Iraq War at least initially, and then I think he had a change. He had like a he mentions in another book. I've got a lot of this writer's books. Robert Kaplan. He writes a lot about Asia. Writes a lot about the Middle East. I enjoy his writing. Again, I don't agree with everything he says, but I do enjoy his writing, and he's one of those American writers who writes well about global geopolitics. Just a good travel writer, but a travel writer who focuses on geopolitics rather than nature or whatever. So it's a subject I like. The subtitle here is Two Cold Wars and a 30-Year Journey Through Romania and Beyond. In this book, he focuses mostly on Romania, the European nation of Romania. And that's why I like his books. He focuses on countries which you might not know about or not know much about and explain why they're important and then go bigger. Um, yeah, so here, chapter 1, Bucharest 1981. Chapter 2 is Bucharest 2013. Chapter 3 is Latin, Byzantium, Latin Byzantium. Uh, yeah, it just goes on and on and on. Um, Talks about Ceausescu. Romania, again, interesting country in an interesting region. Next to Romania is Moldova. Moldova has a large Russian minority. Moldova is next to Ukraine, which also has a large Russian minority. You can use your imagination how they could link up if, let's say, Ukraine was to fall or to fall into a more pro-Russian government, and then Moldova falls into a more pro-Russian government. There was elections in Romania recently where there was it was a hard-fought battle between a pro-EU, pro-Europe candidate and a pro-Russian candidate. I think the pro-EU, pro-Western candidate won, but it was a messy election. And again, Robert Kaplan discusses the importance of a country like Romania. Um, Next, more European history, much older European history. Alison Weir, the Queens of the Conquest, the extraordinary women who changed the course of English history, 1066 to 1167. So the early Norman William the Conqueror invasion, but looking at it through women in the history of that period. I think Matilda, I know, is it Matilda is going to make a Queen Matilda is going to make she's going to make an appearance, but I'm just seeing now, sorry, I got distracted because there's more than one Matilda. Let's just go to the table of contents. Yeah, Matilda of Flanders, Queen of William I. Then there's part 2, Matilda of Scotland. Part 3, Adeliza of Louvain. Part 4, Matilda of Boulogne. And the Empress Maud. That's the Matilda I was thinking about. There was a civil war with King Stephen, early in British. Again, not my area of expertise, but I was excited to find this. I picked it up. This one is a subject that interests me. Again, end of British Empire. This one specifically in Cyprus is called The British and Cyprus. Happy to find this. The subtitle is An Outpost of Empire. The British in Cyprus, An Outpost of Empire to Sovereign Bases, 1878 to 1974. So the author is Mark Simmons. Again, Cyprus fascinates me because Cyprus has a Greek majority, but then it's a divided island. Geographically, it's part of Europe and the EU, but then geographically it's very close to Turkey, very close to Syria and Lebanon. Very geostrategically important, and that's why the British set up a lot of bases there. And the British have a long history of being in Cyprus because again, you can control the Balkans, you can at least hurt Turkey and even Russia. You can control the Middle East. You can control the Mediterranean, all from Cyprus, at least the Eastern Mediterranean. The fall or the withdrawal of the British in Cyprus, although I think the British are still in Cyprus, but then it's that date, 1974, where the story ends. Not a big book, but 1974 is when the Turks took over the Turkish Cypriot side, and the British didn't do much about it. Again, I don't know too much about it, but once I read more about Cyprus, I'll fill you guys in. Maybe if you guys know, anybody knows, in the comments, please do let me know. Now we're jumping from modern European history to older, we can say medieval European history. Then we went back to modern with Britain and Cyprus. Now we're going back to medieval. This is The Time Traveler's Guide to Medieval England, a handbook for visitors to the 14th century, and it's by Ian Mortimer. Again, medieval England is not my specialty or my area. I'm not English. I'm not. But there was another book about, it was like a, I forgot who the author was, which was my preferred. I would have preferred it over this. I haven't heard about this one, but that one was more interesting. It was like a travel guide. I mean, this is a traveler's guide, like traveling through medieval Europe, and written like a modern day travel guide or a modern day, yeah, like a modern day travel log. But I'll take this. I'll take this. Why not? And there are aspects of medieval history that interests me. Uh, there is an idea I have again for a novelization, especially related to to jokers and jesters, court jesters, and court in the medieval. I have this idea percolating in my head, so who knows? It's a bit of a long shot, but who knows? If I have the time, one day maybe I'll get to writing it because it's going to require a lot of research, in addition to a lot of plotting, etc. But anyway, that's for another video because this one is going on and on too long. Last book is the we end with a really I want to say exciting, but it's not exciting at all. It doesn't have a cover, but it's the Northern History of Modern Europe, and those are all the authors. There's like, and look how big this thing is, and this book is falling apart. But again, it was really cheap at the bookstore. I don't know. I said it's more like a textbook, uh, not something you read on the beach. Well, I'd read it on the beach or by the pool, but I doubt anybody else would because I'm just weird like that. But when I was discussing Jester, I don't know who wrote this, but somebody wrote on the top, wrote Jester. Uh, so I don't know what that means. Is the person who owned this, was their last name Jester, or did they just, is it, because is this, when it says modern, what is it, the title? Modern, the history of modern Europe. When does modern start here? Okay, foundations, 1460 to 1559. So basically the Renaissance until, where does this end? Chapter 31, part 5, part 6, the end of European era, 1890 to the present. Yeah, Second World War, post-war, the Cold War, yeah, basically ends very recently. So modern Europe, Renaissance to the Cold War, again with the jester. So maybe it's just a motivation to write my great novel about medieval jesters. Maybe I'll do it. Who knows? Uh, uh, Let me know if that's something that you would read. Would you read a novel, a historical fiction novel about jesters in the medieval Europe? If you know any books about jesters in medieval Europe, please let me know in the comments. I think Alexander Dumas wrote something, and I know Shakespeare has written a lot about jesters as characters. But if you know anything, please do let me know. And I'll, in a future video, definitely tell you more about my ideas. But until then, I'm gonna wrap this up. Thank you again for staying this long. There's one more batch I have of books, and then we can end this awesome book haul. But until then, BookTube, I'll say goodbye and say thank you so much. Salute.